So I've asked Chris here, who I met on the last day of walking Scottish National Trail, if he could sort of share with me, just to have a conversation about our experiences on the trail and our favorite bits, maybe our most terrifying bits as well. So thanks, Chris, for joining us. I thought it would be something a little bit different to what you normally see. We just happened to be in the same B&B in Durness on the same day, and had a little chat in the morning overnight from that, and then so I had your email, so I emailed you asking if you'd be interested. You seem to be very keen. So
well, it's lovely to share the experience with other people as well.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure meeting you, and good to share the experience.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So I just quickly, I run this YouTube channel, which is where this video is obviously posted to, called Wandering Cloud. So I've been walking around Britain for like the last 4 or 5 years, different sort of trails. And then we can talk in a little bit about why I and yourself decided to walk this particular trail. But I live in East Yorkshire in England, and just to say to anyone who thinks it's like Yorkshire is, so this is the part of the Yorkshire is entirely flat. There are no hills, so there's no mountains, so this is not the West Yorkshire, which is better known. But anyway, that's me. Chris, maybe you can just sort of say where you live, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I live just north of Barcelona. I was born and brought up in Scotland, but moved out here more than 20 years ago. I live up I do live in the hills in north of Barcelona. and I mean that being born and brought up in Scotland is part of the reason why I wanted to go on this trail, because I lived for my first 18 years in Scotland. I went to university in England after that, but in Scotland I would go from home to school or home to visit friends and family, but I didn't really get to see the whole of Scotland. And one of the really wonderful things about this, one of the things that really attracted me about this Scottish National Trail was the thought that I could get to see those parts of Scotland I'd never been to before.
Yeah. Well, that's great to know how it came about. I essentially had, I think 2 years prior, finished walking Pennine Way, which is the longest national trail in England, which goes from Edeling Peak District via all of these green areas of England, and it's just stops in Kirkheaton, of all places. So then I just sort of suddenly realized, oh well, I can just continue going north. So that's what I did. And I wasn't able to do this in one go. I have a young daughter at home who is now 7, so there's no way that I could just disappear for 30 days away from the family. But I kind of did 5 separate trips over the course of 2 years. Obviously, that last one was longer because it was so far, so it made sense to just do, what was it, 12 days, I think, at the end. But that's really why I kind of did it. I'm quite fascinated by the British Isles. They're so different geographically, and it is quite fascinating. So that's how I ended up walking, and it was really fascinating, like as you said, and I think I would also say that if people want to walk it, it's probably best to walk it from the south to the north, because there's a certain build-up in the I think if you walk this the other way around, it will be really amazing at the beginning. You'll be a little bit disappointed, particularly, well, the canals for one.
I like that. I like that.
Of course, it depends what you like,
But I agree with you about the south to north. I mean, I did it all in one in one piece, well, almost all in one piece. I did it in May and June of 2022. And that was actually a really nice time to be doing it, because I was walking north with the spring as the spring was advancing through Scotland. The flowers were coming out more or less alongside me as I walked, which is a fantastic sensation. But I agree with you. The southern part is over the borders. It's gentle, relatively gentle. It's extremely well signposted in almost in most places. And the final northern section, the northwest section, which is that part of the Cape Ross Trail, is indeed a mighty bog fighting challenge as you head up towards Cape Ross.
Yeah, but actually, we can talk about that actually, because I think I might have got very lucky with the weather in particular, which is quite amazing because that is not what I expected. But we can just talk about that, I suppose, since we are. I didn't really experience much bog, which there was a fellow on who I met sort of the last 2 days. You might have met him as well, Matthias, who we met on the bus. But I actually was at the Cape with him. And he said that he was a little bit disappointed that he didn't get battered by all possible elements known to Scotland. I was quite satisfied that I could actually see stuff since I was there that far up, but I got mostly, well, not that many days of rain, actually, interestingly, but this was probably very, very lucky because as I said, I've done this in 5 bits. Well, actually, I could talk about that. So, because maybe that's a way to sort of think about this trail and how to perhaps, because there's obviously the northern bit is just simply the very challenging one, even in good weather. So what I did, I started from Kirkhead on over to the sort of the edges of Edinburgh in the first bit. The second bit essentially walked from Edinburgh along the canals. I have nothing against the canals. The only problem is that this is over 60 miles of the canals. So this. And you can step off in very, very interesting places on the way, like Lindisgate, for example. But it's just simply that you do walk for something like 60 miles along the canals, technically speaking. So,
but I mean, Lindisgate, for example, is a great place to stop off at. In the museum there, I discovered that Mackenzie Scott from Star Wars, Scotty from Star Wars, is going to be born in Linlithgow in 2222. So they had a list of all the famous births in
that's a good one.
And the last on the list was Mackenzie Scott, who's going to be born in 2222 in Linlithgow. So I mean the canals are I think they're a necessary part of the Scottish National Trail because it's the Scottish National Trail, and I think the idea that you're seeing the nation of Scotland. And of course, that whole region, that whole area between Glasgow and Edinburgh was the, is the industrial, was the industrial heartland of Scotland, and was the place that a lot of Scotland's wealth came from, and is now, now you can see the remains of that and some revival from it and so on. So I think the canals. I mean, I actually enjoyed strolling along the canals and chatting to the people as I went.
No, I certainly historically, well, that's it is national, and this is why it is called that, because it takes in all of these different places, obviously Edinburgh, everything in between that and Glasgow, and then. So the second stage, I essentially stopped on the edge of the Trossachs Park, and then after that, the third one was to where was it? Well, Kinusy actually. So first Cairngorms, that bit, and then stage 4 I did over to what's called Morvich or Morvich or Morvik. There, and then the last bit I did the rest of it all the way to the north. So that's maybe one way to divide it if people would like to walk it, but you don't have 30 days available to you. And 30 days is probably going quite fast, actually, because I realized that this is essentially something around 20 miles per day, and some of those days are not like 20 miles like along on the flat. They're just not. So it goes slow.
You need to leave yourself time to have a bit of recovery as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a very tough trail, and in fact, what happened to me, I added 2 days onto the beginning of the trail. So I started off at Jedburgh Abbey. This is for reasons to do with my my ancestors, because my ancestors part of my ancestors come from the Jedburgh and Borders areas. So I wanted to walk through the sort of land that they'd farmed. So I did 2 extra days at the beginning and got into Kirkhead on day 2 in the night. But then when by the time I came out of the Cairngorms, I was completely completely tired from
Right. Yeah.
walking. And so I took a few days off and skipped around from there directly to Port Augustus and carried on from there. But I did the whole thing. Well, I did the walk in one
go.
long session from the 5th of May to the 12th of June this year, 2022. And I mean, I'm lucky. My kids have grown up, but I'm lucky I could take 2 months of sabbatical leave and do this.
Yeah.
But it did make it a very, very intensive, emotionally intensive process, because you're moving pretty much every single day. You're moving.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
You're not going to stop till you get to the end, and that's quite an interesting psychological game.
Well, I can imagine that would be quite certainly if you do this mostly in one go, then I think that requires quite some stamina. Like I had never. I am 45. I probably look a little bit younger than I actually am. That's what I'm told. But I am 45, and I certainly can't do what I used to be able to do when I was 32. But I did have very sort of longer days, but I don't think I would be able to sustain that over 10 days, like, constant sort of 20 miles. So the last bit was designed specifically so I could do something between 15 and 20, because I knew that some of these days would be very, very long. Okay, so I think it's quite obvious to whoever might be watching us that you need backpacking skills, obviously, because you're going to have a huge number of days, particularly towards the north. Not the beginning. The beginning is Scottish borders, and of course between the big cities you will find places to stay if you want. Although I have to say that it's nice to save some money by just camping for free in a tent. But I wasn't able to do this along the canals because it's just simply too densely populated to find anything. But other than that, of course, you can. So that's quite obvious. And for example, water in the northern base is completely not a problem, because you have so many streams that it's just. But I think it does require quite a lot of planning. So maybe we could just kind of move on. I suppose some highlights that you remember, particularly from 550 miles. By the way, that plaque by the end, that is definitely not true. Like, I think it's 470. And given the fact that I've done some shortcuts, and I still, as you see on the video there, 500 something miles, I don't know where that comes from precisely, but it's not true. It's more.
Yeah, it's definitely more, and it feels like more. I mean, you ask about highlights.
Yeah.
I mean, there is just so many. I mean, there's just
so many, yes.
Fantastic places. I mean, I loved the little village right at the very beginning, Kirk Yetholm, which used to be the capital for the Roma people of Britain, who they elected their Roma king, in the king or queen in Kirk Yetholm every few years. So. That was a lovely place to start. Lots of walkers arriving from England, and then many setting off as well. The Scottish walks. Gosh, lots of other places.
I had the same problem.
Yeah,
I was making my notes.
Highlights for me often had to do with food. So, for example, the Blair Athol Hotel does an amazing haggis and neeps, and that was just desperately required and very, very, very wonderful at the right moment. And up nearly at the end, north of Reconich, a wee fishing village called Kinlochbervie.
Oh yes, that's right.
Relatively new cafe opened there.
Oh, you managed to get into the cafe. I was there.
Yeah, they do a really good breakfast. So a lot of the highlights are food related. But I mean, other places I remember, like the Glen Loyne up near Cluny. You walk into that glen on the trail, and there is just nothing. There was no human. Yeah, that's right. Evidence of humans.
That's why I made those clips there, because I just sort of stood there, and as you could see, I happened to be there on a very good day. It was perfectly clear skies. It was actually March. So very cold. I'll talk about it later, but I had a very similar impression. It's just sort of like you're just completely removed from everything, essentially. So yeah, I was going to mention the same place, actually. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It struck you as well. Yeah. And then I did a little trail off the trail, as it were. I walked near Inchnadampf.
Okay.
I walked a thing called the Marble Trail,
Okay.
which is it's a surface where marble appears on the surface of the hillside. It's not the official trail goes slightly west of this, but it was a way for me to get to see this. And you're actually at one point walking on white marble, which is an extraordinary sensation because it's sort of luminescent. So there's places like that which are just completely magical on this walk.
I have to say that on that particular day, I was so completely at the end of the day, I think the word is, well, not wasted in the sense that people use it, but just completely exhausted from that ascent over the pass earlier on, that I just pitched something somewhere and just dropped. But it's good to know. So that must have been very close, clearly, but I just didn't have any energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had in fact, I wrote in my blog about that specific day. I mean, I didn't write about many of the days of, in terms of traveling, but I wrote in my blog about that specific day going over the pass, over the Nalak there. And that was up from the Glen Oikel.
That's right, yes.
And I was completely beaten by the end of that day. I mean, it was a long day, and I got the classic thing. I got to the pass at about 7 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, right. Okay.
The clouds were coming down. One of those decisions. Do I go on or do I go back? One of those. You're tired. Very tough decision. So I ate one of the fabulous energy bars I carry around with me.
Yes, well, energy bars very important.
Got me over the pass and down the other side.
So, well, I should maybe say that on those last 10, 12 days, I say 12 because the other two, and we can talk about it later, is actually getting off Cape Wrath, which is another matter. Unless you want to, apparently there is a bus that will cost you £20 per passenger. So I just figured no. So I did walk off it, but on those last 10 days, I was essentially getting up at something like 6, because it does get bright very quickly, and it stays bright, of course, on those northern latitudes. And so that meant that, because that was kind of my plan as well, that I can try and finish by 5 at the latest, because then actually you have the whole day. 12 hours is obviously, so you can still enjoy the views and stop here and there, and you're still. So that's what I did. So I never ended up being that late. But on the other hand, and some of this is in my video, the amount of sunrises that I got was just, I don't even know what to say about that. It was just incredible. So it's kind of like you probably got some sunsets.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, like you, I mean, again, walking in the spring and summer in Scotland, in northern Scotland, is such a treat because of the daylight. I mean,
that's right.
So I would wake up pretty early and get going pretty early, and then have this this wonderful experience of daylight all the way through the day, and then late into the evening.
I should, by the way, can I just mention one thing? This is actually, that's maybe not about daylight. It's actually the opposite. But you mentioned River Loyne. It just occurred to me. And unfortunately, I just had because obviously I didn't want to carry like a camera because it had weight to the pack. So I just had phone with me, and so it wasn't good enough. But on that night, it was in March. It was completely clear skies, and so I pitched a tent, and then it was incredibly cold in the morning. I essentially almost froze, like with my hands trying to pack up the tent. It was so cold. But one thing that I remember was just the firmament of stars. It was just like I don't think I had ever seen anything quite like that. I mean, I have been to what's called dark skies kind of places. Like I just mean, because I think some places are just you'll find lots of dark skies everywhere, as long as you're somewhere more remote. But it was just completely unobstructed view of everything, and there was just like thousands and thousands of stars. That was another one, but suddenly, you know, you just kind of just have this memory. But yeah.
I mean, I think that's a very special place. That, you know, that Loin River Valley. It's you know, it's empty. Well, it's not completely empty, of course, because it also has one or two of the old stone clachans, the old villages that were cleared in the Highland clearances.
Right.
And that's one of the, if you want, you were asking about challenges. For me, one of the challenges, or one of the sadnesses, I suppose, was seeing just how many cleared villages there were.
Oh, yeah, because
you know, I've you know, subsequently read more on the history of the clearances, but there's a very good book by Tom Devine about the clearances called A History of the Dispossessed. And he makes it clear that the clearances there's all kinds of things that were going on. It wasn't just nasty landlords throwing people off the land. Nonetheless, to see so many, you know, oblongs of stones on the ground.
So you see them all over the place.
All over the place. And so many people who must have lived in these beautiful, beautiful locations. And you know, were eventually cleared off. And you know, I think that combination of the clearances and then seeing
there's a kind of a
enormous estates, you know, with these landowners.
I mean, you probably feel it stronger than me, given that you are from the country. But there's something strange about this, in a sense, because on the one hand, you know, like I'm certainly the kind of person who actually wants for those places to be empty. This is why I went there. But on the other hand, you have this sort of palpable. Well, there's a regret. People used to live here, and then they were just completely removed forcibly, of course. So that's very sad. Yeah,
it is. And I mean, you know, but it's also good. It's a good reminder of how the countryside has changed, and also for me a sort of point about aesthetics in general. You know, we, as you say, we do tend to go into the countryside and we look for these wonderful lonely places and these wonderful empty places. But I think that may be quite a modern aesthetic, and I think in the past we might have looked for places where there were people and humanity and, you know, life.
Well, yes, because I think people lived in smaller settlements, so you wouldn't actually go where. So I think it's probably maybe we are probably just simply over stimulated because we live in these enormous cities. That's but anyway. And I could add maybe to or maybe I let you finish with you know, if you have any more highlights. That you
I've got highlights and lowlights, I suppose, coming. I mean, for example, I got to Ullapool after many days of walking through the Vale and so on, Kinlochew. And everything I owned, all the clothes I had, were all completely smelly.
Right.
So I went to the mountaineering shop and bought a cheap pair of kind of jogging trousers.
Right.
And I walked round to there's a laundry, a commercial laundry there.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And I walked round there and I gave her all my clothes and I said, do you mind if I take my trousers off? And she said, as long as you're decent underneath, darling. So I whipped my trousers off and put on these jogging trousers I just bought, and I just gave her the whole lot and said, boil this for, you know, and I'll come back tomorrow and pick it up. Great service, Ullapool Laundry, I can recommend it. It takes all the smell away from your horrible smelly clothes. And I was able to set off from Ullapool with clean kit, which is really
that's amazing. That's an amazing story. Right. Well, I'll maybe share some things. I make quite a lot of notes, but I sort of try to pick like 4 or 5 places. Mine are mostly sort of natural, because that's really why I was sort of doing that. So let me just have a look. Starting from the south. Let's see. Well, actually, so there is in the Scottish borders, there's a hill called Three Brethren, and that's really beautiful and this whole area, you just sort of go on top of these hills for quite a long time before you drop down to, what was it, Traquair, I think, towards Innerleithen, and that's quite remote. Like, you don't really see, and so that was quite unusual, I think, because normally you would be going through these little villages and very quite commanding views of over quite a large amount of time. There's actually also a story from before related to this, which is actually very funny in retrospect, but perhaps wasn't. So in the months, like literally just before the first lockdown started, which would be 2020 in February, I am quite experienced with these things, so I can also walk when there is snow around. But so I was walking something called Southern Upland Way, and that goes over exactly the same. But it was snowy, it was quite wintry and very windy. And basically what happened was that I lost my phone. And I was literally 3 or 4 miles down to Melrose, or or was it Galashiels is the first one there. So I just walked down, and then I spent the rest of the day. And I was supposed to be basically going to some an Airbnb kind of place, but because I didn't have my phone, I hadn't written down any phone numbers or anything. I didn't know where it was, so I tried to get a phone out of Asda, and then I just couldn't get in basically. So I went to a hotel eventually, and there is a story, and I'll. When this video is posted, I am going to sort of do a screenshot from the local paper as I was searched for by the police, and they did find me eventually, because the next day I basically walked on another 25 miles, and they couldn't believe that I was able to walk in this kind of weather. So they were very happy to find me. So there is I basically have been in the news, not in trouble with the police, actually being searched.
That's great.
By the police. Are you safe? So that was lovely, actually, and I got quite a sort of warm memories of people caring, because obviously the lady called the police, and then somebody spotted me in Asda the day after, and that kind of thing. So anyway, but that's the same area. That's the same area. It just looked so different, in sort of brilliant sun, as opposed to sort of very kind of wild, very inaccessible looking, snowy hills. So these places can look completely different depending on where you.
They can, and in fact, in this video, we can share pictures, because I have a picture of me at the Three Brethren.
All right.
In pouring rain and total mist. So I got no view at all from there.
Oh my God.
Just near there,
right.
There's a really lovely spot called the Cheesewell. And
yes, I remember the name. Yeah.
There's a little natural spring coming out of the stone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where people used to take offerings to the fairies.
Wow.
The fairy folk. And I just thought I found it completely magical. And in fact, I made a little offering to the fairies to sort of keep me safe for the rest of my journey.
Interesting.
But beautiful little watery location there, just up on those hills. The people were very, very kind all the way along the walk. I met, people who, I don't know, would offer me some help, or I got offered a lift quite often, actually, and I had to say to them, no. Thanks, but I'm actually trying to walk this thing.
Yes, actually, that's reminded me. I on that road, just the last bit to Durness, I was offered a lift by several people, and I was like, I've walked 500 miles. I can do the last 2. But people were trying to be very kind, obviously. But that drove me. So that I really like that stretch. But maybe partly because of the strange memory that I had. By the way, the phone was also returned to me because it was found a month later, and I got it. Somebody found me on Facebook, because I have a rather memorable name, and because anyway, so that was lovely. So a little bit of Scottish kindness there, definitely, from lots and lots of people. The other place I thought I'd mention, because it was quite unexpected to me. One of the things I didn't do, actually, or hadn't done before walking this trail, is actually look at huge amounts of photos, because I wanted to be surprised in some sense. Like I knew what was coming and how I should be prepared, but for what kind of conditions, but I didn't really. So Glen Tilt, because it's so long, and it's just, and those massive slopes, it is just incredible. I mean, this must have been easily like 10 miles before, and it's quite easy to walk because it's such a wide road, essentially, that you're walking for such a long time before it narrows down. So I really remember that as quite striking. And in some sense, suddenly the scenery changes from sort of gentler part of that. So I really did enjoy that, and I essentially walking all of this walk all the way to, again, I think it's called, was it Binoc Lodge?
Yeah,
Binac Lodge.
Binac Lodge.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, and that's probably the kind of place that you were talking about,
Yeah.
because it looks like it was obviously inhabited, and then
Yeah.
it's completely deserted.
Well, right, exactly. Right next, I mean, Binac Lodge is an old hunting lodge, but right next to it, about a few hundred meters from it, is the old village where, and of course, the next stop from there, Camille, is Scotland's most luxurious bothy, which I don't know if you stayed in.
Oh yes,
which
there's
is
another story that actually reminded me. That was actually very strange, and I certainly do not want to speak anything against the nice gentleman who was just trying to be helpful, clearly. But what happened was I basically had a train ticket over the next day, which was a Sunday, from Kinusey back to Edinburgh and then back down south, because it was the end of one of those stages. And so I had purchased a ticket. I had it in paper form, and then I got to the bothy you're talking about. And there's just, there's a bench outside. I didn't even go in. I just sort of sat there, kind of to recover a little bit. And then this gentleman comes out and says that there are no trains. And I said, yes, there are. And he was absolutely on what he was talking about. This is the Scottish ScotRail were on strike. But of course, this was a Virgin train. So it was a completely different, and so it was there. But basically, over the next day, I was kind of wondering, am I coming back to work on Monday or not? So I remember the bothy from that little episode. So
I mean, it was the first bothy I stayed in on this walk. And of course, it was by far the most luxurious. It has chopped wood, ready for you. It's got
it looks like it's
a
quite
toilet with
well maintained.
Well,
yes,
not flushing toilet, but a hole in the ground toilets, and it's got sleeping quarters and everything. That was a great experience. Although the other two other bothies I thought I'd mention.
Yes.
The bothy, the bothy on the night before you get to the last night before you head up to Cape Wrath,
right?
Is
just after Sandwood Bay.
After Sandwood Bay,
right? Yeah.
Is totally fascinating because the inside's all been painted with these naive pictures by the man who's described as a recluse who lived there for many years, a guy called Sandy. And he painted in this kind of naive style the whole of the inside of the bothy. So that was fascinating. And then the other bothy that I think is worth a mention, well, partly because I was there on my birthday, which is great, is Maelvuida, which is which is spectacular because it's very, very isolated, very lonely, next to a lovely loch. And in fact, a couple of friends joined me there for the eve of my birthday and brought me a birthday supper, including roast venison and cockaliki soup.
It's quite
powerful memory. It's
quite posh for the kind of place that it is.
Exactly.
Oh, well done. Well, that is a beautifully located bothy, and thank you for pronouncing that, so I can actually learn from that, because that was one of those difficult ones. But yes, I think it's supposed to be one of the most remote bothies anywhere. Not surprising that.
I think it must be. Yeah, it's a long way from anywhere.
It is a long way from anywhere.
Yeah.
So so I mentioned these two, and then of course I would mention Falls of Glomach, which is just amazing. I unfortunately kind of lost the path shortly after that, so I kind of did a little bit of a treacherous activity for 2 minutes. Trying to find it back. It was very difficult to find the path once you've passed and then there's a little bit of difficulty walking down at one point, because there's a little bit of scrambling, if I remember correctly. But it's an amazing view.
Falls of Glomach is absolutely fabulous, but we should issue a kind of warning to people going that way. It is tricky to find the trail, and the trail does go down quite a steep.
That's right. Yes.
Section, so it needs some care there. And of course, at that point, you're carrying a big rucksack. It's
that's right.
Yeah.
So
folks should take care there. Yeah.
Well, one thing
do you want to talk briefly about the Cape Wrath itself and the walk?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just mention two more places, and then definitely.
Okay.
So I mean, and in fact, if people watch my videos, then you would see that I made a very special mention and special kind of stop in there of Sandwood Bay, which now I don't quite know. Sometimes you just don't know why you experience what experience. I certainly feel very, very connected with nature in general, and as I said, generally speaking, this is why I was doing this on my own. I get out on my own if I go somewhere longer, and there was something. I think there was something about the fact that this is very close to the end. You've been walking for a very long time, and also if you do that on your own, and you are completely alone with your thoughts for a very long time. It's almost like I read a book recently. I'm in the process of reading this, which is called the Master and His Emissary by somebody called Ian McGilchrist, who is actually Scottish. And he talks about right hemisphere. This is lateralization of the brain. He's saying that the experiences of this kind this is not to say that, of course, things do not overlap. Obviously, they do. It's not as simple as that. But largely, one of the sort of poetic, artistic, experiential experiences, so to speak, they are. And I sort of felt like I just kind of entered into one aspect of my brain, not just in the place, but in general over those 10 days. And it was almost like a culmination of it. It is incredibly beautiful. And there was something about also which one of the reasons I really like Scotland and British Isles in general, but is that it's rugged, and so this is a different kind of beauty than perhaps some of the holiday resorts that you might want to go to. So there was something about it. It was obviously very windy, but it was also kind of a little bit of rain, like this sort of classic northern weather, with like 5 minutes of this, 5 minutes of that, and you see in the video it's like the sand just lashing against my rucksack that I put somewhere on there. And there was something about it. I don't know what it was, but it was really almost like some sort of quasi-religious experience. I can't quite explain it, particularly since I'm not religious.
It's very interesting. I think on these sorts of long walks, and again, if you're walking on your own, what I found was that first of all, one is living absolutely in the moment. You're just experiencing what is around you, and that's an incredibly releasing, and as you say, can be occasionally quite spiritual kind of experience of just letting everything else go and just being in the moment. And it's a corny phrase. It's being in the moment is a kind of corny. But when you walk for days and days, in particularly in a place like Scotland where it's quite challenging and you're quite exhausted, and it's hard work. It really cleared the mind having that, thinking about that.
That's right. Yes,
being in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then the other I suppose the other element of it is it's very simple. All you have to do is just walk.
There's nothing more to it. There's a chap on who has a YouTube channel. I think younger than me probably, but he called his channel "Always Forwards," and I think that's essentially what it is. I wanted to mention one more place, which is actually not so much a place and experience. Then we certainly can move on to what you suggested, which is talking about Cape Wrath and that sort of, which is so over the mountains from Inchnatamp that day towards Glencool, and then first you've got this the sort of strange wooden structure where you can hide the shelter, and 5 minutes after that on that path there is this loch called Fleodach Coir. I don't know how you pronounce this precisely, but it's there's one unnamed one and there's another one on there. And when I was there, so it was quite cloudy in the first place, and then as I was walking down to it, it started clearing up, and I did try to catch it on the video. It was probably the most amazing thing I have ever seen in my life. It was something about these clouds clearing up from and sort of showing these slopes, and it's all quite wild, obviously, around you. And then I remember walking up that pass towards the pass shortly after, and at one point the loch disappeared, and I was essentially above the clouds. And there's just this sort of experience. So it's not really, perhaps this place is not as amazing as lots of other places I have seen, but it was just that particular moment, and it was, you don't see these things normally. You just, you know, so it's just, I suppose, a coincidence that you are at the right place at the right time. But it was really,
yes. Although if you know, if as you and I have done, if you spend, you know, weeks walking out in the wilderness, you know, you give yourself the opportunity to see these wonderful things, you know, so that, you know, they occur.
Yeah.
They occur
So that was,
around you.
that was, well, beautiful doesn't quite cut it. So I don't quite have the words for these sort of experiences. But anyway, Cape Wrath.
Well, Cape Wrath is really weird, isn't it? I mean, what an extraordinary place. I mean, first of all, you know, geographically, there you are. You're at the northwest corner of Scotland.
Right.
There's a
Apparently,
200-meter or 150-meter cliff, you know, in front of you.
Billy Bryson described this as the absolute end of Britain. It certainly feels like it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And then there's the, you know, this extraordinary Victorian lighthouse.
That's right.
And then inside the sort of machine shop of the lighthouse, or the back rooms of the lighthouse, you meet John Ewer, who lives there.
Yes, that's right.
With his daughter, and they run a cafe.
Yeah.
There. There's no, you know, there's no traffic of any sort. It's just folk walking. And so it's kind of, and then folk coming on the bus trips, which we'll talk about in a second.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And then, you know, it's kind of hot soup and crisps, you know, and it's...
Yeah, they just sort of serve breakfast, but, you know, like whatever, like just, and then you sleep, because I did sleep there.
Oh, you slept there?
Yeah, I did. And it was the other two chaps that were there. And you sort of go through this warehouse, essentially kind of room behind the cafe through the door at the back there. And then, you know, it's basically... like there's no, it's just, it sort of feels a little bit like 100 years ago, essentially.
Yeah, it does.
You know, I mean, they do have a car, of course, to get out, and I think they also use it to get money from people. You know, you sort of, you can buy a place and get out of there. But I thought that they were fascinating people. They're really beautiful people, actually. I thought they were very kind and very sort of quiet, and so the kind of people that precisely fit the area.
Well, you know, John, because I asked John Ewer about living there and you know, why he lived there, and he said that he'd lived with his daughters when they were younger, and his wife and daughters when they were younger in Inverness.
That's right. Yes.
And Inverness was just too busy for him.
That's right. Yes.
And so
you might have mentioned that to me when we met.
We met, exactly. And that, you know, that was an indication. Inverness is really not a very busy place, but so that was an indication of how much sort of loneliness he was looking for. But yeah, I think it's in the nature of someone who chooses to live, and I agree. He's very generous and very kind. You know, he's running a business, or, you know, which he intends to open up a couple more spaces for sleeping, I think. And
right, that's okay.
But he's running a business basically around the cafe, a few souvenirs, and then as you say, he charges a solid £20 for the trip down to the road end. Which the group I was with, we all just went for it. But
it's fair enough.
It's but he's also very interesting about the wildlife in the area, because of course that Cape Wrath is a military firing range, and so there are areas that, you know, humans don't really ever go to because there's a danger of bombs falling on them.
Yes,
he says it in the craters created by the bombs. There are all sorts of lizards and snakes and sort of interesting amphibians that you don't see elsewhere that survive there.
Yeah. So I think I saw some from sort of a distance on the way down, just the last couple of miles. It's fascinating. I thought that, you know, certainly most people wouldn't choose this kind of existence. But I think probably there's a, you know, I don't know, I'm probably somewhere, we're not quite there, but I do understand that. That's it's actually, I think probably being alone rather than being lonely. I think, we all know that people can feel lonely and surrounded, by hundreds of people. So that's not necessarily, and I thought that's impressive. I find people like that impressive because, they're doing something different from the rest of us, frankly.
In the mainstream, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
So, yes. So, and I, unfortunately, speaking of just walking up to the Cape itself, I have developed, shall we say, some slight knee pain just on the last bits, and it was sort of coming and going over the next 2 days. After that, well, I think it was essentially because there was clearly a lot of no path, and it was on sloped ground, and I think it's just basically more than I had ever put myself through. But I am a trooper, so I just basically walked slower. So on the day after, so I slept overnight there, and the next day, as you would see in the videos, unbelievably windy. It was basically storm. So I walked to Kirvey Bothy, the next beach towards the east, because that was my plan, actually.
Yeah.
And I should probably mention that as well as a highlight, because in some sense, this was probably the quietest place maybe I have ever been, because I was there completely on my own. It's a bothy used by the military. It was huge. There was one mouse inside, so that I had that for company for the night, like sort of scratching. But it was just sort of stormy weather. It was sort of like a smaller version of Sandwood Bay, essentially. You can see it from the road a little bit. Sort of towards the left, towards the coast, as you're on the bus.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
Down,
but it was just completely empty of anything. There were deer nearby grazing, and I was just essentially on my own for most of the day, because I started at something like 11 a.m. but it was only 5 miles, so that was just and I actually found that there's something even for myself that you find that you're maybe a little bit too impatient to just stay somewhere for 6 hours, not necessarily, but it was a fascinating experience. So definitely also a highlight. And then over the next day, I went back to Durness from there, walking around.
So you walked down from the bottom.
I walked to the roads to Durness, around the Kyle,
and then.
And then essentially avoided people who wanted to give me lifts in their cars, because it was like, it's just 3 miles, so I'll do it.
Good for you. Yeah. And then into Durness, yeah.
That's right. Yes, and so that's where. So yes, that's it was quite. I should probably mention one thing that happened to him, and in some sense, it would be amazing to have this recorded somewhere, because I don't think I had ever seen anything quite like this, and that was at Loch Glencool. So I was, where the bothy is near the loch, on the shore, and then shortly after that, you climb quite steeply up. And as I was pretty much on top, suddenly there was this extremely fast plane just sweep over the loch. It was just, it was basically like suddenly, some MiG entered the area. They were clearly training, but it was just an incredible view. It was just.
Yeah, no, it's very dramatic. I mean,
yes,
I'm not very in favor of the military, I'm afraid, but it is very dramatic when they do those low flights up through the glens. I saw a similar sort of thing at Inchnadanf, in fact, jets coming in very, very.
And I think maybe just one more thing to mention about this whole area, sort of Kylestrom and sort of north, that it was quite fascinating, because it's one thing looking at the map on all of these tiny bodies of water, and then there's Ben Dravy, where you see from the top a lot of these tiny lowlands just everywhere, like sort of just scattered across these slopes. It was really fascinating. It's almost.
Yeah, I mean that whole area is, geologically it's fascinating. It's got the it's got fascinating rock formations, and in fact in Kylestrom there's a rock cafe where there's people who talk about explain the rock formations and so on. I think that whole area is really really lovely. Again, just so we're clear, that area north of Kylestrom is owned by Grosvenor Estates. That means the Duke of Westminster is the big landowner there. And of course, over the years, they've done some extraordinary work on the estate, but it's still, for me, one of those areas where you think, well, it's great there's a big landowner who's investing in the area and spending money there, but is that the best way to organise the Scottish countryside? And that for me is, that for me is
well,
one of the kind of takeaways from this from this long walk. I mean, I think, I came away with a few thoughts at the end. One is just as we've been talking about, the extraordinary beauty of the Scottish countryside and the extraordinary variety, and the Scottish National Trail really takes you through, really gives you that huge variety. I also, came away with that lovely, as we were saying, kind of almost spiritual experience of just spending a long time on the roads on my own. Of course, the sense of achievement. And then, of course, to mark the walk, I was staying in Inverness with my daughter, and I decided to get my ear pierced.
All right.
To sort of record the fact that I went to a place in Inverness called Extreme Tattoo, which I can recommend to you, where everybody's pierced absolutely everywhere.
Right.
I was just asking, could you just put a tiny hole in my ear, please? So I had they were lovely, absolutely lovely. So I came away with all kinds of things, both physical things and mental.
That's
things,
amazing. That's a lovely story. Yeah. Yeah, but I agree that there's so much. There's a variety in the countryside as well, as you said. One other place which is actually quite unusual, because it's not in the north, but there was a place in Glen Almond or Ormond in Perthshire, which actually was quite a difficult day. It's probably actually was the most difficult day for me, because it was basically so it happened at the end. So that's very close to Loch Frushi. There, so it's just like 3 miles there. So I'll describe the place in a moment, because I thought it was incredibly beautiful, but in a very different way to sort of extremely dramatic landscape. But that day was difficult, just simply because I think I had 3 fordings. It was essentially pelting it with rain the whole day, so I could see, like, probably on no other day, interestingly, because there wasn't that much rain. I was very lucky with the, in fact, it was a little bit too hot in the last 2 days, 10 days of this walk. It was essentially, I got a massive tan in the north of Scotland. So it was just, but that particular day, I needed to, cross one major stream, which was supposed to be just, one leg over and you're on the other side. And then it was just completely raging sort of thing. And I was, shall we say, less prepared than I should have been with that, which on the next stage of that, I was much better prepared. But then there was the, I think, first passless stretch down the glen towards the river. And let's just say that the map had the bridge marked on it, but there is no bridge because it was broken.
Yeah.
So I had to, in a rather treacherous way, very carefully cross over what was essentially a massively raging large river, Almond River. So there was a sort of a
there is a weir further down which I crossed.
Yes, well, I hadn't known about that. So I was sort of like, I'll be a man here, I'm going to be brave, like. So I did. It was just a couple of steps, but essentially it could have been very slippery, obviously, because you basically had to walk over very slippery stones on a raging rivers, throughout. So that was one, and then essentially there was a couple of fordings, and it was so bad that I was actually wet on my feet. It was the only time. I always have like 6 pairs of socks, so there was no problem overnight, but it was just a very, very wet day. And that's probably the kind of thing that mostly people might expect at some stage.
I think people need to, I mean, because there's various places where there's a few fords that have to be to be crossed. There's also coming down from Glentilp towards Kingussie, there's a few rivers to ford on the way down.
That's right. Yes,
could be tricky. I mean, the Walk Highlands website, which is another of the joys of this walk, for me, it's extremely good. It's very good.
Extremely good. You will get warnings about every
warnings exactly about
well, that's what I had read before that.
So but yeah, I mean it's a very demanding it's a very demanding walk. 500
Actually, I should mention too. So this was one I just want to mention this place, which is it's probably I was there in August, and August is the best place for this particular place. So once you sort of have there's a little, well, not a village, just a hamlet, a couple of houses really, and then you sort of veer left away from the river up the slopes, and there's this extraordinary place with this purple heather. It's just incredible. And interestingly, I'm not the only one thinking that, because somebody else who had walked this trail also put a separate video of the place. So it's very, very striking, and I think it's probably the most striking in August, because that's when those colors are at their best. So so that was quite fascinating. The other place I should mention that is probably the most dangerous place on the entire thing is crossing the motorway into Pitlochry. That was properly. I remember waiting there for 20 minutes trying to cross that road. There is no traffic lights. There's just, in fact, Walk Highlands again has a specific warning. You don't want to be flattened there. Just be careful, because it's a very fast road, and it was literally difficult to get into the town.
I agree. I mean, and it's a recognized path, and it's a shame that the local council doesn't put some
it's actually quite
traffic lights or a little bridge over there, because
it's, by the way, a very lovely, and this is definitely not on the trail, but if you are in Pitlochry, there's a really lovely waterfall on I think the eastern side of the town, called Black Spout. And it's one of those managed sort of parts kind of things, but you have a little bench there, and it's really quite beautiful. It's kind of like the one where is it near Aberfeldy?
Yes, those lovely waterfalls near there.
Yeah, one of those. It's just a very pretty spot. So yes, I did, because we mentioned at the beginning that we made a couple of detours. I essentially had to make one detour in order to catch the public transportation back home at the end of one stage, and that was the Great Glen Way, which is supposed to go along the Caledonian Canal all the way to the south. I didn't do that. I took the sort of the northwestern side, and then you can cross across to Invergarry much faster. So that's essentially what I did. And I think there's also a little bit to the west of Invergarry, which sort of follow the body of water and then cross the river, I think, at some stage. But I basically was a little bit worried about crossing rivers, so I just took over a bridge, just walked on the roads. So yeah, you will do obviously some minor detours here and there. I don't think I would recommend people if you are near Kinnussie, because that is I put it on my video because it's such a lovely 360 panorama view from Creag Beag, which is a hill just like 2 miles out of Kinnussie. It is very close to where the trail goes, but the trail doesn't actually go through it. I would certainly recommend people go up there, because it's you've got the cairngorms on one side over town, and then so it's a really quite an amazing place. And I thought, like, I could do lockdown in places like this in the day, because that would be a good place to exercise, I have to say, rather than in a city. But yes, well, anything else you'd like to add? Because obviously there's so many things that's we could talk about this, but
no, I've covered all the points I wanted to make.
Yeah.
I mean, but I wanted to say thank you to you, because it's such a treat to meet someone who's also done the Scottish National Trail. There's not that many folk who've done it, and to meet you in that bed and breakfast and have breakfast together the day after we both walked out from it. That was a real pleasure, and I'm very glad that we've.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed meeting you. It was quite a nice surprise, because most people obviously walk the Cape Wrath Trail, and in fact, the two people that I was with at the Cape were. But it is quite unusual actually to meet somebody who have walked the entire thing. But I do
at various points on the walk, I heard about people who were ahead of me. So in just coming out of Edinburgh, I heard about an American who was a day ahead of me, And I was walking really pretty fast by then and covering a lot of ground. And I never caught this mysterious American. So I don't know where he was or who he was or what happened to him. But
there was a gentleman I met. He was definitely walking the Cape Wrath Trail, but this is kind of slightly similar story because it was an English gentleman from Cumbria, and very, very surprised by the weather we were getting. And in fact, he didn't have any sun cream or anything. So I was like, so he was wearing this black everything, like you're going to fry here because you're walking. Obviously, you get warmer, and it was 6 days or 7 days of essentially constant sun. It was apparently it was the complete opposite to everywhere south in Britain, which is maybe defies some stereotypes about the Scottish weather because. And last time I had been there about 6 or 7 years ago in that area in Sutherland, essentially, it was exactly the same. So maybe there's something about May, June weather. But I think he was simply taking, because there's so many alternatives to Cape Wrath, and of course the last portion of the Scottish Trail is using the same. So I thought I was walking relatively fast, but he just kept sort of like suddenly appearing ahead of me out of nowhere. And so we met about 4 times, I think. And at the end, he actually gave me some of his food because I thought like, well, why are you carrying additional food to what you need to carry? So I'll eat that. So we met, the last time I met him, I think was just outside Karlstrom. And then I think he probably stayed at that last bothy you described, but I didn't. Because I started essentially near Reykjavik, so I did 20 miles on the last day.
Right.
So I kind of just sat outside of it, but I think he probably has stopped there. So but it was quite hilarious. It was sort of like. I don't know. I felt it was like in some kind of a film, where somebody, some evil person. He was a lovely man, by the way, but it sort of felt like, where did you come from?
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yes.
So look, it's lovely to talk to you about.
You too. Thank you very much for making the time.
There's more memories we can come up with
for it. So
again, thanks for inviting me to come and talk with you.
Well, I wish you many more similar. You might have noticed that at the end of the video, then when I was sort of speaking from Sango Bay Internet, sort of like maybe something definitely to repeat, maybe not. 550 miles, maybe.
It's a long way to repeat.
It's a long way to repeat, but well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. It was great sharing all of these memories. And I'll also make sure that the book that you mentioned is in the description for people, because that sounded quite interesting to look at. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thanks, Camille.